They laughed when I said I'd make it, told me I was chasing shadows, wasting time. When I got on that bus, not one person said goodbye. Now they're sitting in my office, desperate for a loan to save the family business. And I'm sipping my coffee, pretending I don't remember their names. See what happened next. Hello, thank you for your support. This means a lot to us. We're on a journey to our first 100 subscribers. If you enjoy the stories we share, kindly subscribe to this channel. It will be great if you can leave a comment on which city you are watching from. We might just give you a shout out in our next story. Today's special shout out goes to Sandra Green from Chicago. We are glad you enjoy our stories. Now let's dive into the details of today's story. They didn't say it outright. Not at first. It was more in the way they looked at me when I brought up the application. How my father's hand paused halfway to his coffee. How my mother's eyes darted toward the window like she could disappear behind it. I told them I got in. A startup incubator in a city 3 states away. Fully remote for now, but in-person opportunities were growing. They nodded eventually. My father mumbled, huh, like I'd said the weather was turning. And that was it. No questions.
No excitement.
Just the quiet verdict beneath it all. You're still not leaving. In my hometown, ambition was the same thing as betrayal. You could dream, sure, quietly in your room between loading shifts at the family store. But if you did anything about it, if you left, that was something else. That was arrogance, delusion, selfishness, and worse, ungratefulness. I'd spent my whole life absorbing that lesson. So when I packed my bags, I didn't tell anyone beyond the required. Not until the last week when the bus ticket was paid for, the job locked in, and the lease signed. Even then, I only told my family in a short, deliberate sentence over dinner. I'm leaving on Tuesday. Forks scraped plates. No one asked where. My brother Aaron chuckled like it was a joke. Tuesday, huh? You booking a round trip? Or just the dream-chasing package? His smile was wide, performative, the kind that makes everyone at the table feel in on something but you. My dad laughed too, low and half-hearted. My mother didn't look up. It was my uncle who said it loud enough to count. Nobody really leaves this town. They try, sure. Then they come back broke. And that sealed it. I sat there with the knowledge of everything I'd built. Every line of code, every late shift, every dollar saved. And realized no one here would ever see me as anything but a punchline. The worst part wasn't the laughing. It was the shrug. The casual dismissal. Not a single one of them asked what I was working on. Not one leaned in to say, tell me about it. You think you're immune to that kind of silence until it sits across from you at dinner and picks its teeth with your courage. I didn't cry when I packed my bags. I didn't cry when I boxed up my laptop and the notepads full of sketches and product designs. But when I opened my high school yearbook just to check one last time if anyone had written anything real in it and found nothing but jokes, I laughed until I almost threw up. The morning I left, I stood on the edge of the gas station parking lot with my one suitcase and my laptop bag. The bus was late. Everything smelled like old oil and dust. I watched the convenience store clerk chain smoke out back, wondering if he recognized me. He didn't. The phone in my hand buzzed once, just one time. A message in the old family group chat I hadn't checked in weeks. It read, "She actually did it," sent by Aaron. Liked by my uncle. No one else responded. I stared at it until the bus pulled up, and then I deleted every contact one by one. I didn't look back. What was there to look at? The bus was mostly empty. The windows rattled in their frames. As the town shrank behind me, I felt something heavy lift, but not off my shoulders. Off theirs. Like my absence was a relief they'd been hoping for. A problem solved. I watched the cracked streets and sagging awnings blur past. Every landmark a final confirmation that they'd written me off before I ever left. I wasn't someone chasing a dream. I was someone escaping a sentence. A name they'd roll their eyes at if it ever came up. You remember her? What was her name? The one who thought she'd be something. I don't know what I expected that first night in the city. Maybe to feel proud. Maybe to cry. But instead I sat on a mattress on the floor of a shared apartment that smelled like onions and industrial cleaner, and stared at the ceiling for 3 hours. I kept waiting to feel like someone new, but all I felt was the echo of Aaron's voice in my head. You'll be back. They all come back. It didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a prophecy. like he'd seen this movie before. And I was just another rerun. The kind you don't watch all the way through. That's when I made the list. It started with the names of everyone at that dinner table. Then it grew. People who laughed. People who ignored me. People who watched me beg to be taken seriously and did nothing. I didn't write down what they did. I wrote down how it made me feel. Not to punish them. Not yet. But to remember. Because forgetting is how you go soft. Forgetting is how you end up back on your knees, trying to be understood by people who are committed to misunderstanding you. I wouldn't forget. Not one smirk. Not one silence. I'd carry it with me. Let it grow teeth. They think ambition is loud. They think revenge is explosive. They don't understand the kind that ferments. The kind that watches. The kind that waits. I didn't speak to anyone for the first 3 days. Not out of some grand protest. Just because there was no one to speak to. My new apartment was a third-floor walk-up in a building that smelled like boiled rice and disinfectant. The lock stuck, the heater groaned, and the shower made a sound like it was choking on rust every time it turned on. But it was mine. No one knew me here. No one expected anything. That kind of silence was terrifying at first, but clean. Sharp. Like a wound scrubbed raw. I slept with my bag zipped shut, and my laptop tucked beneath my pillow. Not because I thought someone would steal it, but because it was the only thing I owned that could still get me out. The first night, I stared at the cracked ceiling tiles and told myself out loud, "This is where you begin again." My voice startled me. I hadn't heard it all day. I got up, made a list on the back of a receipt. Rent, food, Wi-Fi, and one line beneath it that I underlined twice, profit by month 3. It was stupid in hindsight. Cocky. But I needed something that made me feel like I hadn't just destroyed my whole life. I set alarms for 4:30 a.m. every day after that. I took freelance work nobody else wanted, cheap data entry, ghostwriting blog posts for self-help coaches who called themselves soul architects, even designing Canva flyers for dog groomers. I said yes to everything. I didn't have the luxury of waiting for a calling. There was a coffee shop 3 blocks from my place with unreliable Wi-Fi, and exactly one outlet that worked. I got there before the doors opened most days, just to beat the students who came later with their shiny MacBooks and trust funds. I brought my own tea bags and asked for hot water to save money. The barista, Marco, started calling me Sunrise. I never corrected him. I wasn't the same person here, and I didn't want to be. My real name belonged to a version of me that used to ask permission to exist. The one who stood in rooms with her voice clamped between her teeth. That girl was gone. Or at least she needed to be. In my old life, everything was a negotiation, approval, affection, space. But here anonymity was currency. No one judged me for working 6 jobs, or eating plain rice 3 nights in a row. No one knew my last name. I liked that. I liked not having to explain the way my hands trembled when I spoke in meetings, or why I flinched every time I opened my inbox. Every interaction was temporary, transactional, and blessedly free of subtext. I made progress because I didn't waste time performing. Every hour of the day had a purpose. The resentment that had been leaking out of me like steam back home was now focused heat. It was around month 2 when the idea hit me. An inventory tracker for micro-retailers. Something simple, visual, adaptable. Built for the kind of people who ran shops like my dad's. People who still scribbled orders on napkins and forgot where the receipts went. I sketched it in a notebook between translation gigs, then started coding after midnight with eyes that burned and hands that cramped. The work kept me from thinking too much. About what I missed. About who didn't miss me. I didn't post online. Didn't call home. I told myself I'd earn the right to speak again, when there was something undeniable to say. One night, maybe day 60, I opened a new browser tab and typed my hometown's name into the search bar. Nothing had changed. Same mayor. Same faded photo of Main Street in autumn, pretending to be more charming than it was. I clicked on the Facebook page for my family's store. The last post was from a month ago. Something about a 4th of July sale. 3 likes. One of them was from my uncle. I stared at it for a long time, not out of nostalgia but curiosity. Like watching footage of a place where a crime happened. A place I used to live but didn't survive. The loneliness came in strange waves. Not when I was struggling but when I succeeded. when a client paid me more than I asked for, or when a project went viral in a small niche forum. My first online course made $78 in passive income, and I stared at the number like it was a punchline. There was no one to tell. No one who would care. I think that's when I realized how deeply I'd been conditioned to perform success for the approval of people who never wanted me to succeed in the first place. The celebration always came with a leash. The higher you climbed, the more they'd say, "Don't forget where you came from." But what they meant was, "Don't become someone who makes us feel small." I learned to take screenshots, save emails, record voice memos to myself about progress, like evidence in a future trial no one knew was coming. I had a folder on my desktop called Remember Why. It wasn't full of inspiration. It was full of receipts, screenshots of texts, comments, memories typed out in detail. I didn't dwell on them. I just kept them, like firewood stacked for winter. Like something I'd burn later, not to destroy, but to warm myself when it got cold. By month 3, I had paid rent without borrowing, launched a beta product, booked 3 consulting calls, and still, every night before sleep, I heard Aaron's voice again in my head. "You'll be back." They all come back. Some part of me still wanted to call him, not to reconnect, but to tell him he was wrong, that I was still gone. That I didn't miss the way they made me feel like I owed them for breathing. But I knew better. You don't throw water on a fire to prove you've moved on. You let it burn out. And you build something they can see from a distance. Something tall enough to cast a shadow over the place that called you nothing. I whispered one thing to myself before I fell asleep that night. A sentence I hadn't let myself say until then. "I'm not coming back." Nobody tells you that healing can feel like hunger. That even as you get stronger, something inside you keeps gnawing, asking if you're just getting better at pretending. I built systems, routines, mapped out each day in 30-minute blocks, color-coded in a Google Calendar that looked more like a military operation than a life. Wake, code, email, walk, read, work again. I didn't talk to my roommates unless I had to. They rotated out every few months anyway. We passed each other like shadows in a hallway. I never learned their names. That suited me just fine. The less I needed, the less anyone could take from me. My product evolved. The inventory tracker turned into a full ecosystem. A dashboard for small shop owners that handled supply, trends, even staff hours. I stayed up nights designing the UX, poring over message boards, reverse engineering the pain points of a demographic I knew too well. My father's old register. The way he used to curse at his paper logs. My mother scribbling numbers on receipts and shoving them in a drawer. Every feature I built was another quiet reparation, but I didn't design it for them. I designed it in spite of them. Every time the app solved a problem they used to laugh off, I felt like I was erasing them one failure at a time. I stopped using my real last name online. Not because I was hiding, but because I was molting. Every public-facing account used a modified version of my first name and a made-up company title. When clients asked where I was based, I said, "Remote." When they asked how I started, I said, "Small like everyone else." They nodded, assuming I had some tidy success story. A family who believed in me. A childhood lemonade stand. I let them believe it. It cost me nothing, and their belief bought me time. In truth, every dollar I made came from a place no one wanted to look. Anger, exile, humiliation. But I was learning how to turn shame into leverage. The nights were the hardest. Not because I was lonely, but because I wasn't. I liked the silence too much. It scared me sometimes. How easy it became to forget what warmth felt like. I didn't call anyone. I didn't post on birthdays. I didn't check who got married, had babies, changed jobs. I figured if they didn't miss me then, I didn't owe them curiosity now. I kept waiting for the guilt to come, the homesickness, the nostalgia. It never did. The only thing that visited me in the dark was the cold clarity of memory. Aaron's voice, the smirk in my uncle's eyes, the way my mother adjusted her napkin instead of looking at me when I said I was leaving. Those moments didn't haunt me. They kept me sharp. After 6 months, the app had its first 100 users. Word spread through niche forums, mom-and-pop business groups, late-night Reddit threads. I didn't market it, I let it be found. That way the users were honest. Their reviews came raw, unfiltered. Every time someone wrote, "This saved me hours," I added it to my private screenshot folder. I didn't share the praise. Not even with myself. I hoarded it like ration food, knowing I'd need it on days when everything felt fragile. And those days came often, especially when a project failed, when a launch flopped, when the code broke and I stayed up till 3 a.m. rebuilding a database that deleted itself. Success was not a straight line. It was a staircase in the dark. One wrong step and you were back at the beginning. I had no safety net. That was the difference. The people I worked with, the ones who posted threads about burnout and retreats and protecting your energy, always had somewhere to fall. Partner. A family. A circle of people who'd Venmo them rent or talk them through the crash. I had no one. Not out of pride, out of necessity. I couldn't afford to be vulnerable because I knew what waited on the other end. You'll be back. That phrase had become my spine. Every time I failed, I heard it. Every time I succeeded, I heard it louder. As if the echo of their doubt lived in the applause I refused to accept. By month 8, I had an intern. Then 2. I paid them more than I paid myself. One of them, Mia, said, "You don't seem like a boss." I asked what that meant. She shrugged. Most people like hearing themselves talk. You don't. It's like you're always somewhere else. I didn't answer her. But she was right. I was always halfway between the code in front of me and the past I refused to return to. I didn't know how to be present. Presence required peace. I wasn't building a business, I was building a weapon. One I could aim from any distance. With a steady hand and a smile no one would question. I started tracking names. Quietly. Not just of clients but people from home who were slipping. A cousin's business going under. A friend of a friend declaring bankruptcy. I never celebrated it. I just noted it. Like chess pieces shifting across the board. Like God blinking. I knew the time would come when those names would circle back. Not knowing who they were emailing. Not recognizing the woman who read their pitches with a neutral face and a closed tab. I didn't fantasize about revenge. I just prepared for it. Because revenge, real revenge, doesn't live in spectacle. It lives in restraint. One night I opened my inbox and saw a familiar surname. It wasn't direct family, just someone adjacent. A soft probe. A small-town expansion idea they thought I'd be perfect for. I didn't reply. I didn't even open it. But I stared at the name for a long time. It had begun. The circle was starting to close. Not because I chased them. Because I became someone they couldn't afford to ignore. Nobody claps for the climb. Nobody watches the hours, the failures, the thousands of tiny humiliations. But one day, you open a spreadsheet and realize you haven't checked your balance before buying groceries in months. You haven't apologized for your ambition in over a year. You haven't thought about calling home, not even once. And that silence, that's the sound of scar tissue. Quiet, thick, unbreakable. I didn't tell anyone I was coming back. It wasn't a homecoming. It was a scouting trip. A controlled burn. I flew in late, off-peak flight, off-brand rental car, black slacks, white button-down. Neutral. Unmemorable. The woman at the rental counter asked if I was visiting family and I said, no, that was true enough. I drove in just as the sun dipped behind the silos, casting the town in that slow, bruised light I remembered. It looked the same. Not in a comforting way. More like a wound that hadn't healed right, still scabbing at the edges. The same cracked signs, the same crooked gas station banner that read under new MGMT, but never actually was. You could always tell a dying town by its optimism. It hung in the air like mildew. I parked 1 block off Main Street, behind a vape shop that used to be a bakery. Slid on sunglasses even though the sun had dipped low. Not because I needed them, but because I didn't want to see my reflection in their windows just yet. This place didn't deserve to recognize me. I walked slow, let the soles of my shoes make that sharp click against the pavement. The sound made people glance up, but not at me. At the sound. They were used to soft steps here. Familiar boots. Worn sneakers. I didn't belong in their rhythm anymore. And that was the point. Every block felt like reading old diary entries out loud. Uncomfortable, but useful. I wasn't visiting for nostalgia. I was gathering intel. The store was still there. My family's old pride. A squat brick building with the same sun-bleached awning and neon open sign that blinked like a failing heartbeat. I didn't go in. I stood across the street and watched. 1 customer. Then 2. No one under 50. I took note of the hours, the slow turnover, the dead signage. It wasn't personal. It was analysis. Just another business with outdated systems, poor digital presence, and a dying clientele. I pulled up the property records from my phone and cross-referenced ownership. Still in my father's name. No liens yet, but close. Debt stacked in predictable increments. Just enough to keep the lights on. Just enough to pretend nothing was falling apart. I booked a room at the only hotel in town with cardless check-in. No human interaction. Just a 4-digit PIN and a door that creaked like it remembered better guests. I didn't unpack. I didn't sleep. I spread out my notes, businesses, property values, patterns of decline. I already owned 2 LLCs that held land just outside town. I had eyes on 4 more. The goal wasn't revenge. Not yet. It was leverage. I needed to understand what I was walking into before I pushed. My success had always been about precision, not noise. Let them believe they were still important. Let them keep their delusions. I wasn't here to break them. I was here to buy the ground under their feet. The next morning, I walked into the bank on Main Street like a stranger. Asked to schedule a meeting with a loan officer on behalf of a private investment partner, looking to fund small-town revitalization projects. The receptionist smiled too brightly, like someone who'd been trained to pretend hope. "We've been praying for something like this," she said. I nodded. Didn't answer. Her name tag said Casey. I remembered a Casey from high school, blonde, sharp-tongued, always voted most likely to succeed. This one had brittle nails and eyes that flicked to the clock. Life was unkind to the girls who peaked early here. I wondered if she recognized me. She didn't. I scheduled the meeting under a fake project name and walked out without looking back. Later that day, I passed Aaron on the street. He didn't see me. Or maybe he did, but couldn't place the version of me walking past in a blazer and heels that didn't click in the same beat as theirs. He looked older. Not in the graceful way. He looked worn. Puffy under the eyes. Still had that swagger in his walk, though the kind that said the world owed him something. I followed him with my eyes just long enough to see where he parked. Still driving the same beat-up truck. Still playing the same role in a story he thought he'd written. I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt confirmation. The prophecy he spoke, "You'll be back," was unraveling in real time. I was back, but not for him. I was here to close the loop. That evening, I visited the town hall records office. Asked to browse public commercial listings. Played the role of an assistant for a client looking for charming investments. The clerk didn't even blink. Just handed me the binder and went back to her sandwich. I made a list. 5 properties ripe for acquisition. 3 already in distress. I cross-referenced with the businesses tied to names I hadn't said aloud in years. My cousin's bakery, my uncle's hardware store. A neighbor who once told my mother I'd be lucky to marry rich. I didn't smile. Not once. I just kept writing. You don't plan an avalanche. You position the snow and wait. On my last day, I walked into the coffee shop that replaced the diner where I used to write college essays between shifts. It smelled like cinnamon syrup and generational delusion. Behind the counter stood a girl no older than I was when I left, wide-eyed, underpaid, waiting for something to begin. She didn't know me. That was the magic of leaving and returning with power. You become a myth no one recognizes. I ordered a drink I didn't want, sat near the back and listened. Conversations bled out in soft spirals. Complaints, regrets, stories from people who didn't know they'd already been outgrown. I didn't belong here anymore. I wasn't angry about it. I wasn't sad. I was free. When I drove out of town that night, headlights cutting through the dark, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt cold, focused, like a storm that hadn't touched down yet. I wasn't here to remind them who I was. I was here to set the stage for what they'd never see coming. They didn't need to recognize me. They only needed to rely on me. That would come soon enough. The first one to walk in was my cousin Jay. He didn't recognize me. Not even a flicker. Just stepped into the office like it was any other Tuesday. Shaking hands too hard, talking too fast, trying to sell confidence he didn't have anymore. He looked thinner than I remembered, desperate in the soft kind of way. The kind of man who hadn't been told no in years but could smell it coming. He asked to speak with the partner in charge, assuming I was the assistant. I didn't correct him. Just offered him a seat in the glass conference room and asked if he'd like still or sparkling. I watched him through the pain as he paced, pulled out his materials, arranged them in little hopeful piles like a child displaying found rocks. A presentation folder with clip art. Charts with typos. Numbers that didn't add up. I'd seen this 100 times already, small business owners trying to spin failure into strategic growth. He said he ran a legacy brand. What he meant was a bakery that hadn't modernized since 1993. When I returned with the water, he smiled in that performative way people do when they think they're charming someone. "So," he said, "is your boss around? I'd love to make my pitch." I sat down across from him and said, "You already are." He blinked once, twice. A pause just long enough to register confusion. Then recovery. "Oh," he said, chuckling. "You're her. That's great. Sorry, you just look younger than I expected." I didn't smile. I didn't correct him. I didn't offer a name. I let the moment hang. A simple silence. Me watching him. Him realizing. The first seed of discomfort planted deep behind the eyes. The itch of recognition without memory. He tried to continue his pitch, voice too loud now, like he needed to fill the air. I asked him one question. About his debt-to-revenue ratio, and watched the air go out of his posture. He didn't know the number. I already did. Over the next week they came one by one. A cousin, a family friend, someone who'd once asked my mother if I was slow, because I didn't talk much at school events. They came into the office with folders and faked optimism, dressed in desperation disguised as business casual. They never looked me in the eye for long. Maybe something about the room unsettled them. Too clean, too sharp, too modern for a town still clinging to paper receipts. I let them talk. Smiled politely. Took notes. Never offered my name. Most assumed I was just an analyst. A gatekeeper. They talked over me like I was furniture. I let them. Aaron didn't show up until the following Monday. I knew he would. The family business was bleeding money. The local market had already pulled out. They needed a loan to stay solvent. I scheduled the meeting myself, under a generic shell company name as always, and watched from the window as he walked up the steps, shoulders squared like someone who still believed they were owed respect. He greeted the receptionist with the same smirk he used on waitresses and women he thought were beneath him. I stood behind the mirrored glass of the conference room, arms crossed, waiting. When he walked in and saw me, he paused. Only a second. A flicker of recognition that didn't quite land. "You're the investor?" he asked, not quite ready to believe it. "Or the assistant again?" he added, a joke laced with just enough condescension to test the waters. I didn't answer right away. I gestured to the chair. Let silence stretch out until it became uncomfortable. Then I said, "I review all proposals personally." He sat down, less confident now. I watched his eyes scan my face, searching for something familiar. A flaw. A weakness. Something to ground himself in. But I didn't give him that. I was polished and unreadable. A mirror he couldn't control. He launched into his pitch, voice flatter than before, as if trying to prove he still had leverage. He talked about family legacy and preserving tradition. He didn't know the numbers either. His language was vague. His plan incoherent. He dropped buzzwords like safety nets. At one point he said, "I've always believed in building things that last." I almost laughed. Almost. But I didn't break. I asked him how many employees he had. How many of them were under 30? He couldn't answer. I asked him about digital integration. About online sales. His eyes darted. He fumbled. Tried to pivot to charm. "You know how it is in small towns. We do things different here." I nodded. "Yes," I said. "I do know." When the meeting ended, he asked for a business card. I handed him one with a generic logo and no name. Just a number. I told him I'd be in touch. He hesitated, then said, "Have we met before?" His voice was quieter now. Not uncertain, curious. Almost respectful. I tilted my head. Gave him a small, unreadable smile. "Not really," I said. "But we've been in the same rooms." That was enough to unsettle him. He walked out slower than he'd walked in. And when the door closed behind him, I finally exhaled. Not relief. Not triumph. Just release. The shift had started. The confrontation wasn't explosive. It was erosion. One forgotten face at a time. That night, I sat at my desk and reviewed the footage. Every meeting was recorded for compliance, yes, but also for memory. I watched each of them squirm, posture, unravel. None of them saw it coming. None of them knew they were being measured against a yardstick they built for me. I clicked through the clips like photographs from a life I'd outgrown. Paused at Aaron's face. Rewatched the moment his voice faltered. Not for pleasure. For precision. These weren't enemies. They were case studies. And I wasn't finished studying them. The next phase would require more than silence. It would require choice. How many would I let fall? How many would I let beg? This wasn't about cruelty. It was about clarity. They taught me to believe I was disposable. Invisible. Now they would learn what it feels like to be seen and still not chosen. I wasn't here to be recognized. I was here to be remembered. There's a particular kind of silence that drives people mad. Not the absence of sound, but the absence of certainty. It's the silence after a job interview where you thought you nailed it. The silence after a text you shouldn't have sent. The kind of silence that makes you relive every word, every glance, every imagined misstep until you can't tell if you're remembering or rewriting. I gave them that silence. I let their proposals sit untouched for 6 days. Not rejected. Not approved. Just pending. I let them sweat in the space between hope and dread. The same space they left me in for years. I knew what they were doing while they waited. I could feel it. Second-guessing their tone. Wondering if they'd said something wrong. Rehearsing what they'd say in a follow-up. Telling themselves I was just busy. That it wasn't personal. I watched the email tracker tick. Jay opening his proposal 12 times in a day. Aaron's forwarded twice. Once to someone named Dad. A cousin's desperate follow-up with the subject line. Just checking in. That smiley face was the tell. Trying to seem casual while slowly unraveling inside. That's the part they never expect. Not rejection. Not cruelty. Just a door that doesn't open. A kindness withheld. A mercy they feel entitled to and don't understand how to earn. On the 7th day, I replied. Not with answers, just requests. Additional documentation. Updated balance sheets. A third-party valuation. All the things I knew they didn't have ready. The things that would take them hours to pull together. They replied quickly. Too quickly. Absolutely. No problem. We'll do today. The kind of eager obedience that only comes from people realizing too late that they're not holding the cards. I made notes in their files not about their businesses but about their language. How quickly they softened. How easily they bent. How fast they slipped into the tone of people hoping proximity might equal forgiveness. I saw Aaron again 2 days later. He showed up without a meeting. Said he was just in the area. Which was a lie, and we both knew it. He lingered in the reception area. Made small talk with Casey, tried to catch my eye when I walked past. I didn't stop. Just nodded politely, the way you would to someone you think you might know but can't quite place. That look hit him harder than a slap. Indifference has a way of rotting a man's pride faster than rage. He stood there for a few seconds too long before walking out.
No appointment. No answers.
Just the echo of his own irrelevance trailing behind him like dust. By week 3, the tone of their emails had shifted. No more confidence. No more assumptions. Just a creeping awareness in the spaces between words. Please let me know if there's anything else you need. Would love the chance to talk again, if it's not too late. We're open to renegotiating terms if that helps. I printed each one and added it to a binder labeled Access. Not because I needed documentation, but because I wanted to feel the weight of it. Paper is heavier than pixels. So is regret. Every page reminded me how quickly the people who laughed will kneel when the room goes quiet, and they need something from the person they thought wouldn't last. They started talking to each other. I could feel the threads being pulled behind the scenes. The shared confusion, the gathering suspicion. Who was this investor? Where were they from? Why did they seem familiar but stay unnamed? The mystery was intentional. I had scrubbed every identifying detail from my materials. Even the receptionist didn't know. And the more they wondered, the more they filled in the blanks with panic. I let it grow. A low-grade fever of uncertainty infecting the people who used to speak with certainty about me. Let them squirm. Let them guess. Let them wonder if the ghost they buried was the one writing their checks now. On Thursday, Jay sent a voicemail. He sounded tired. Flat. Said he understood if the answer was no, but just wanted to say he admired the operation. That I was clearly someone who knew how to build. It was the first honest thing he'd said in a decade. I saved it. Not for evidence. For myself. I played it back late that night while brushing my teeth. Not because it made me feel good, but because it made me feel real. Their doubt had once defined me. Now it fed me. Not like a meal but like oxygen. Quiet. Invisible. Essential. I didn't need them to fall apart. I didn't need them to beg. I just needed them to realize they were no longer at the center of the room. That the girl they'd dismissed had outgrown the space they tried to trap her in. I wasn't punishing them. I was protecting myself from ever slipping back into that version of me who asked for permission to be taken seriously. There's no glory in vengeance for its own sake. But there is something unshakably human in watching the balance of power tilt, slowly, quietly toward justice. At the end of the week, I drafted 5 reply letters. All templated. All polite. All designed to say no without saying it outright. Unfortunately, at this time, we are unable to proceed with your request for funding. While your business has clear local value, it does not align with our current strategic focus. We encourage you to seek alternate avenues of support. I signed them on behalf of the board. No name. No direct contact. Just enough to end the conversation. Not enough to let them place the voice that had once belonged to the girl in the corner, the one they called shy or quiet or a waste of time. I watched the mail carrier pick up the envelopes from the lobby, one by one, like slow confessionals. I imagined them opening them around the same table where they once laughed at me for dreaming. The same rooms that had grown too small for what I'd become. And I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel cruel. I felt finished. Like a door had closed behind me and sealed shut. Not with a bang. Not with a final word. Just with the sound of nothing. The first person to say my name out loud was a girl from high school who had once taken my lunch tray and dumped it on the floor as a joke. Her name was Lindsay, and she worked at the local print shop now. I saw the post late one night, buried in the town's community Facebook group. Screenshot of a local business going under, with a caption beneath it that read, "Crazy coincidence. Anyone else remember her? Didn't she leave years ago? Word is she's the investor behind all these takeovers." It didn't get many likes, but it didn't need to. I knew how whispers worked in a place like this. They didn't need to shout to be heard. I watched the comments roll in like slow leaking gas. That name sounds familiar. Wasn't she that quiet girl who left on a bus? Heard she runs some kind of tech thing now. Lives in a big city. None of them knew anything concrete. Just fragments. The same way they used to speak about people they didn't understand. Quietly, cruelly under their breath. But this time, there was an edge of something else. Uncertainty. Discomfort. Regret maybe. The kind that sets in when you realize the ghost you laughed out of the room grew teeth. Built walls. And learned to live without needing your name in her mouth ever again. By the time Aaron called me, really called me, I didn't even hesitate before answering. I knew what the tone would be before he said a word. He opened with my name like it was a question, a test, as if saying it out loud might summon the old version of me. "I figured it out," he said, voice careful, like someone approaching a wound. "I knew you looked familiar, but I didn't. I didn't think it was really you." I didn't say anything. Just let him sit in the silence he used to weaponize. "You could have told me," he added, quieter now. "We're family." That word felt ridiculous in his mouth. I almost laughed. Almost. "I did tell you," I finally said. "Years ago. Over dinner. I told you I was leaving. And you told me I'd be back." He was quiet after that. Not shocked. Just small. "I didn't mean it like that," he said, the way people do when they realize the damage is permanent. "You know how it is. We joke. We didn't think you'd really go." I imagined him standing in the same house, under the same flickering kitchen light, holding the same stories like they were gospel. "No," I said. "You didn't think I'd really become." He tried to explain, but I hung up before he could finish. Some things don't deserve closure. After that, the unraveling began in earnest. Emails came in less like inquiries and more like confessions. People asking for clarification. For meetings. For reconsideration. They used words like misunderstanding and fresh start, As if we were equals in the damage. As if I hadn't built every brick of this life from the space they left behind when they decided I was never worth staying for. The local newspaper ran a profile on my company without naming me. But the town knew. It was in the language, the reverence. The sudden switch from ambitious brat to visionary founder. They didn't say sorry. They changed the subject. The most poetic moment came when the building that housed my family's store, still technically theirs, was listed for foreclosure. I didn't buy it. Not directly. I let a holding company I controlled make the offer. Below market.
No negociasten.
The agent called me 3 times to ask if I wanted to revise it. I didn't. On the 4th call I picked up and said, "They'll take it." She hesitated. "You sure? It's your..." I cut her off. "They'll take it." And they did. Within 2 weeks. I never set foot inside. I didn't need to. Some ruins are better observed from a distance. Quiet. Undisturbed. Like headstones. Jay sent a letter. Handwritten. Said he was sorry. Said he didn't realize what I was building. Said he respected me now. That was the one that made me pause. Not because I believed it, but because of the word now. He respected me now. Not when I packed my bags. Not when I stood at the dinner table and told them my plans. Only now when the outcome made sense to him. Only now when my success could be measured in square footage and bank wires. I tore the letter in half and dropped it in the trash. If respect is conditional, it's not worth the ink. The news spread further than I expected. A regional magazine picked up the story, framed it as a boomerang founder returns to reinvest in her roots. That headline made me sick. There was no boomerang. I didn't come back to give anything. I came back to own. But the world loves a redemption arc they can understand. They want the prodigal daughter. The local girl makes good. They want to believe I did it for love. For loyalty. But I did it for the girl no one defended. The one who sat alone on buses. The one who was laughed out of rooms. I did it for her. And she doesn't owe them a narrative. Some nights I walked past the storefronts I now owned. I didn't go in. Just traced the outlines with my eyes, watching how the light fell across names they never thought I'd live long enough to outgrow. There was something sacred in the stillness. I didn't feel like a god. I didn't feel like a villain. I felt like a fact. Undeniable. Quiet. Etched into the architecture of a town that once erased me. And I knew they would never forget this version of me. Not because I reminded them, but because I let them figure it out too late. The final moment of reckoning wasn't loud. It came in the form of a voicemail from my mother. The first in years. Her voice was soft, like she wasn't sure it was allowed to be there. "I saw the article," she said. "We didn't know. I mean, we always knew you were smart, but..." She paused. "You really did it." A beat of silence. Then, "If you ever want to come home for dinner, just let us know." I didn't delete it. I didn't save it either. I just let it live there, in that gray space between old grief and new clarity. I listened to it once. And never again. I didn't need a seat at their table anymore. I had built my own. They walked into my office like strangers. Not because they didn't know who I was. By now, they'd figured it out. But because they didn't know what version of me they were walking into. Aaron wore a tie that didn't suit him, and shoes that hadn't seen polish in years. My mother was behind him, holding her purse like a shield, her eyes scanning the room like it might rearrange itself if she just blinked hard enough. My father stayed back, letting the door close gently, as if loud noises might shatter whatever thin permission this meeting had been granted under. I didn't stand to greet them. I didn't offer water. Just sipped from my coffee slowly, and let the silence do what it was made for. They sat down across from me at the table, not the desk. Another intentional choice. I didn't want them looking at me like a daughter. I wanted them seated like clients. Applicants. People asking for something. The chairs weren't uncomfortable, but they weren't forgiving either. Faux leather slightly stiff. No armrests. Designed to keep people upright and alert. Aaron cleared his throat like he might speak first, but no words came. I didn't help him. Just set my mug down, and opened the folder they already knew had their names on it. I flipped through slowly, too slowly, letting the sound of paper fill the space where affection used to live. The proposal was sloppy, rushed, full of soft numbers and big hopes and legacy talk. Family owned since 1985. Community trust. Built on tradition. It read like a plea to be remembered as something they never were to me. I closed the folder and folded my hands over it. You're asking for a bridge loan, I said. Not a question. Just a fact. My father nodded once. To restructure. Keep things afloat until the new quarter. My mother jumped in quickly, as if time was bleeding. We know what it looks like. But we've done the math. With the right partner, we can rebuild. I watched them. Their eyes never quite met mine. Like they were speaking to a memory, not a person. Aaron shifted attempted confidence. And we figured, you might see the value in keeping it in the family. The word landed like an insult. I let it hang, then reached for my coffee, took another slow sip, and leaned back in the chair I'd chosen carefully for days like this. Deep-seated, soft leather, silent swivel. Power that doesn't need to announce itself. Remind me, I said. What exactly did you used to say? About people who leave? The silence sharpened. My father opened his mouth, but nothing came out. My mother looked down. Aaron winced like he'd stepped on broken glass. I smiled. Not cruelly. Just enough to let them feel the shape of what they were sitting in. Consequences. No one apologized. Not really. Not directly. They said things like, we didn't know. And you were always a little too ambitious. And you've clearly done well for yourself. I let the flattery die in the air. It wasn't real. It was hope dressed as kindness. A hope that if they said the right combination of words, I might forget the years of being erased in my own home. The years of being overlooked, mocked, gently humiliated. I hadn't forgotten. I'd archived it, bound it up tight, labeled it clearly, and built an empire with it. Every insult was now an asset. Every dismissal a dividend. They didn't know how much they'd invested in my success when they bet against me. Eventually, Aaron tried to pivot. So, what would the terms look like if we were to move forward? I tilted my head as if considering, then stood up and walked to the window, hands in my pockets, the way they used to do when they were trying to seem in control. The skyline stretched wide beyond the glass. Not towering but clean. Modern. Expensive. A city that knew how to forget the past and build a shinier version over it. I turned back to face them. Why this office? I asked. Why come to me? My mother hesitated. Because we trust you. That was the moment I felt it. The final snap. The quiet betrayal of their own narrative folding in on itself. They never trusted me. Not then. And not now. They just had nowhere else left to go. I returned to my seat slowly, rested my elbows on the folder, and looked each of them in the eye. You're right, I said. I have done well. I let the words land gently. No venom. Just wait. But I don't make decisions based on family, or memory, or legacy. Aaron leaned forward slightly, like he might still salvage something. Then what do you base them on? I didn't blink. Performance. The silence that followed was heavier than anything we'd carried into that room. My mother started to say something. I saw her mouth form the beginning of my name. But I cut her off with the softest sentence I'd ever spoken. I don't remember your names. Their faces didn't contort. They didn't explode or cry or rage. They just stilled. Like people trying to process something too far removed from the logic they lived by. I stood up, gathered the folder, and walked to the shredder in the corner. Fed the first page through. Slowly. Let them watch. It buzzed low, almost tender, as the paper disappeared into ribbons. There won't be a partnership, I said. There won't be a loan. I looked at Aaron one last time. You were right, by the way. I did come back. Just not for what you thought. I walked to the door, opened it and waited. They stood unsure. You can see yourselves out. The sound of their footsteps down the hallway echoed long after the door closed behind them. I returned to my desk, picked up my coffee, now lukewarm, and took one last sip. The mug had a quote on it, faded, almost gone. Build quietly. Let them wonder. It was something I'd found on a sticker years ago, back when I still needed mantras to survive. Now it was just a reminder. Of the girl I'd buried. Of the silence I chose. Of the weight I no longer carried. The past didn't own me anymore. But I remembered everything. They laughed when she left. Now they're begging at her door. And she doesn't even remember their names. 4 more cold-blooded revenge stories that burn slow and hit hard. Subscribe now. Miss one, and you'll regret it later. just like they did. See you soon in our next story.